Before Tunguska, there were signs in the sky. In the winter of 1897, deep within Siberia's endless forests, strange reports began to surface. Villagers scattered across the taiga spoke of lights in the sky, fiery orbs that drifted silently overhead before vanishing into the darkness. They called them heavenly fires, but these flames left no smoke, no ash, no sound. A shepherd in the village of Nizhny Karalinsk wrote in his diary of a night when the snow reflected red as if the sky itself had caught fire. His cattle panicked, and he felt the ground tremble beneath his boots. He thought it was a bad dream, yet when morning came, the snow was pocked with strange blackened patches, warm to the touch even in the freezing cold. Other accounts described glowing trails like comets too close to Earth. Children cried at the sight, elders muttered prayers, and some claimed to hear a low hum carried on the wind. Yet when they looked for answers, there was nothing. No fallen star, no scorched trees, only silence. These were not isolated stories. Notes from travelers and wandering traders spoke of villages that gathered in fear, watching as the skies flickered. One account even described a faint explosion heard far away, though no damage was ever found. Still, the sensation lingered. Something immense had brushed against their world, too vast to comprehend. At the time, these tales barely traveled beyond the settlements. Russia in 1897 was preoccupied with famine, politics, and the slow march of empire. Who would care about distant peasants claiming to see fire in the sky? Their words were left in letters, in half-filled journals, in church records gathering dust. Yet, with the benefit of hindsight, these fragments take on a darker weight. For 11 years later, in the same wilderness, the sky would erupt with a force so great it flattened forests and lit the world's horizon. The Diaries of 1897 had whispered a warning. Few had listened. Among the scattered villages of Siberia, belief and survival were tightly bound to the rhythms of the land. When the lights of 1897 cut across the skies, many did not see them as natural. To the elders, they were warnings, omens, the kind of signs spoken of in church sermons or whispered around the stove when the winds howled outside. One priest in a remote parish wrote that his congregation trembled as the night sky flickered red. He urged them to pray, to beg forgiveness, convinced that the heavens themselves were opening in judgment. In a village nearby, hunters refused to venture into the taiga after dark, fearing that the forest had been claimed by spirits angered at man's intrusion. Children were told to stay inside, candles burning by the icons on their walls. Mothers hushed their families, fearing that even speaking of the lights might summon more. A few dared to write of these nights in their journals, though their words carried a trembling uncertainty. One villager described it as the fire of the end times. Another wrote simply, "The sky groaned and we waited, yet not all saw only doom." A handful of younger men wondered if these lights were stars falling to earth, omens of fortune rather than disaster. But their voices were drowned in the greater fear that swept through the settlements. For in Siberia, where isolation and hardship already pressed heavy on every soul, the thought of the sky itself rebelling was too much to bear. The sense of foreboding did not fade with dawn. For weeks, Rumors spread between traders on the frozen rivers, villages haunted by fire, snow that glowed in the night, the earth trembling without cause. Few in power paid attention. These were, after all, only peasant tales. But among those who witnessed them, the lights were not forgotten. They were etched into memory as a prophecy of something vast yet to come. The stories did not remain in one village. They traveled, tucked into the pockets of traders, scrawled in the margins of route ledgers, carried by men who crossed the taiga with sleds and quiet eyes. Along frozen rivers and through black pines, the tale of the 1897 lights moved like a cold wind. Fiery orbs drifting without sound, snow that glowed as if warmed from within, a low tremor beneath sleeping houses. A fur buyer riding east recorded that 3 separate hamlets described the same sky. Streaks of light that bent strangely as if pulled by an unseen hand. A postal rider wrote of dogs refusing the trail on a night when the northern horizon smoldered red. In a frontier chapel, the priest copied a line into his register not meant for church books. They say the firmament cracked. Where routes converged, at way stations of tea and thin soup, the accounts were compared like coins held to lamplight. Some were embellished. Others grew smaller with retelling, as if those who had seen too much were ashamed to admit it. Yet a pattern emerged. Lights, tremor, silence. No impact, no fallen embers, no crater to circle with fearful distance. Only the feeling that something immense had passed near enough to rattle the bones, then gone on without leaving proof. A traveling surveyor, skeptical by nature, sketched the region on coarse paper and marked each report with a dot. The dots made a curve, he realized, a path arcing across the wilderness toward emptier lands, places where no one would bother to write what they saw. He closed the notebook and told no one. His map felt like a confession. By spring, the talk had thinned, swallowed by thaw and labor. Fields demanded hands, hunger demanded plans. Still, a handful of diaries kept their vigil, preserving the uneasy winter of the lights. Years later, when the world finally learned the name Tunguska, those pages would open like old wounds. But in 1897, they were only warnings. Muted, scattered, and easy to ignore beneath the endless Siberian sky. They said the cliffs above the bay had eyes. Sailors spoke of them in hushed tones, as if the very act of naming them could awaken their gaze. To the naked eye, the rocks were jagged, nothing more than the gnawed teeth of an ancient shore. But in the dusk, when the tide dragged itself back into the sea, faces emerged in the stone. Hollow sockets, weather-worn mouths, stretched in silent screams. Some swore they moved, ever so slightly, following the path of those who dared camp near the shoreline. The diary we found bears the trembling hand of its author. They stand in rows. At first, I thought them mere tricks of shadow, yet last night when we built our fire, I counted 8 faces turned toward us. This morning, there were 9. The entry grows more frantic. Sleep became impossible, the men refusing to turn their backs to the cliffs. One awoke shrieking, claiming he had dreamt of stone hands reaching, dragging him beneath the earth. Another was found wandering barefoot among the rocks at dawn, his eyes wide and unblinking, as though he had been listening to a whisper carried on the wind. Local fishermen warned the explorers long before they set foot here. The land, they said, was cursed, a burial ground older than memory. The cliffs were not stone alone, but guardians, watchers that fed on fear, on the breath of those who trespassed. And still, the expedition pressed on, documenting, sketching, writing, as if their records would protect them from the truth. But a diary page cannot hold back hunger. The more they wrote, the more the faces multiplied. The diary grows thinner here, as though the author's hand could no longer steady itself against the rising dread. The entries turn erratic, days missing, words smeared by rain or by trembling fingers. Yet what remains is chilling. This morning, 3 tents stood empty, one line reads. No sign of struggle, no footprints leading into the dunes. The supplies remained untouched, lanterns still burning faintly as if their owners had simply risen and stepped away into the mist. Another page. We searched the cliffs. We called their names until our throats bled. The faces in the stones seemed to smile. Witnesses, if they can be called that, noted strange phenomena. The sound of voices carried on still nights, not echoing from the sea, but from deep within the rocks themselves. Some swore they heard their own names called back to them. Others said the air grew heavier, as if the earth itself pressed down upon their lungs, urging them to submit. By the 4th day, half the company was gone. No bodies, no signs of departure, only journals, abandoned clothing, and the impression of figures in the sand, as though they had lain down to sleep and dissolved into the shore. The few who remained refused to record more, but the last legible line is stark. I cannot count the faces anymore. The cliffs have no end. Then silence. The diary ends. Its last page is blank, yellowed by salt, brittle as though it had aged a century in days. What became of the camp? No one knows. But when fishermen return seasons later, they claim to see lights still burning on that beach and faint voices calling from the cliffs at dusk. Voices that did not belong to the living. By the time we reach the final scraps of the diary, its ink is faint, the lines broken. Yet each word carries the weight of a man writing against his own end. The entry begins shakily. I am alone now. The sea does not move as it once did. Even the tide has forgotten us. He describes the cliffs as alive, shifting in the corner of his vision. At night he hears the rhythm of breathing, slow, steady, as though the land itself inhales. Once, he claims to have seen eyes open within the stone, wet and glistening, watching him with hunger. His tone is no longer that of an explorer, but of prey. He confesses that he has not eaten in days, yet he dares not venture far. The lantern oil has run dry. He writes by the faint glow of moonlight seeping through his tent. The cliffs whisper. They know my name now. When I sleep, I feel their gaze pressing into me. I will not last another night. The final sentence is scrawled across the page, letters uneven as though written in haste. If you find this, do not look at them. After this line, nothing, only silence. And yet, the journal itself was discovered intact, carried ashore by waves that bore no other trace of the expedition. No bones, no wreckage, only this warning. To this day, the cliffs remain. Locals avoid them. Travelers pass quickly, refusing to linger after dusk. Some swear that if you dare strike a fire upon that cursed beach, new faces will appear in the stone, adding to the watchers, ensuring that the count is never complete. The story does not end with the lost explorers. The cliffs remain, unchanged yet never the same, a wall of stone that seems to breathe with the centuries. Those who wander too close tell of a presence, unseen yet undeniable. Fishermen lower their eyes when passing the bay, for they swear the rocks lean closer, listening. The diary, preserved against reason, was returned to the archives. Scholars studied its pages, dismissing talk of shifting stone as fever or madness. Yet the handwriting was steady until the final days. The fear, the obsession with being watched, grew not from illness, but from something outside the page. What makes the cliffs most unnerving is their silence. No birds circle overhead, no crabs scuttle across their base. At dusk, the sea itself seems to retreat, as if unwilling to touch the shore, and always the faces wait. Some are twisted in anguish, others serene, but all gaze outward, unblinking. Locals whisper that each new face marks another soul claimed. Explorers, wanderers, the careless who dared to linger after nightfall. Even now, travelers who camp along distant beaches claim they hear voices at night, carried not by waves, but by the wind through stone. They describe dreams of sinking into rock, of opening their eyes and finding themselves trapped forever, staring outward from the cliffside. Perhaps the diary was not a warning, but an invitation. A voice pulled back from the abyss, daring others to look upon the watchers, to count them, to wonder when the cliffs will decide the tally is complete. And if you ever stand there at dusk, with the firelight flickering and the tide slipping away, you may feel it too, the weight of their gaze. Waiting, endless, eternal.